Here's the truth. The first time she told me to get off her HOA property, I laughed because my grandfather's ranch was never in any HOA. 3 months later, I wasn't laughing. My contractor's license was frozen, strangers were photographing my porch at 2 a.m., and my wife was repeating concerns that didn't sound like her at all. Somehow one immaculate neighbor with a plate of cookies had turned my entire life into a maze of fines violations and whispered rumors. But when I opened the envelope my grandfather hid in his workshop, photos, recordings, names, the pattern snapped into focus. This wasn't about grass height. It was about power leverage and a fake authority hunting for the one piece of land she couldn't control. She thought I'd fold. She didn't know what I keep for moments exactly like this and who I can bring into the room when it counts. Before we dive in, drop your city and local time in the comments. When I first pulled my old F-250 into the dusty driveway of my grandfather's ranch, the air smelled like cedar rain and freedom. 3 acres of open Texas sky stretched beyond the faded red barn, the same one where I'd spent summers helping him fix engines and drink black coffee that could dissolve rust. Roy Marshall had lived on this land since 1985. He always said, "This dirt is honest. Don't ever let anyone tell you what to do on your own soil." The house was quiet now. No humming of the radio, no sound of his boots on the porch. Just me, 49 years old, starting over after 2 decades of city contracts and traffic noise. I was ready for peace, not trouble. But peace lasted exactly one morning. She arrived at 8:05 a.m., sharp. Perfect posture, flawless makeup, pink blazer, and a smile so polished it looked manufactured. "Welcome to Pine Valley Estates," she announced, stepping out from behind her white Lexus. "I'm Karen Blake, HOA president. We like to keep things orderly around here." HOA president, my brow furrowed. Grandpa's property was outside any development boundary. No fees, no rules, he made sure of that. I remembered signing the county plat myself when I transferred ownership, but she moved with the confidence of someone used to being obeyed. "I brought you our welcome packet," she said, extending a glossy folder covered with the HOA's logo. Inside were fee schedules, mandatory community guidelines, and a printed calendar of monthly inspections. It looked absurdly official: embossed seals, faux legal text, even color-coded property codes. "Appreciate it," I said carefully, "but I think you're mistaken. This ranch was never under HOA jurisdiction." Her smile didn't fade, it only sharpened. Everyone says that at first. But after incorporation in 2020, all properties within Pine Valley's shared access roads are subject to HOA oversight. "Don't worry, I'll bring the legal documents tomorrow." The way she said oversight made my stomach tighten. She talked like a CEO granting me a favor rather than a stranger trespassing on private land. When she turned to leave, she lingered, eyes scanning my workshop, my truck, even the tools hanging on the porch like she was taking inventory. That night, I called the county clerk's office, just to make sure. No HOA incorporation, no filings, nothing. I chalked it up to a misunderstanding and went back to sorting Grandpa's tools. That's when I found it, a sealed letter taped beneath the workbench drawer, written in the careful, blocky handwriting I knew better than my own. "Jake," it began, "if you're reading this, she's already knocked on your door. Don't trust the woman across the street. She's been trying to take this property for 2 years. Says it's about community improvement, but she's after control. Everything you need is in the storm shelter. Use it before she does to you what she did to the others." Grandpa Roy, the storm shelter. I hadn't been down there in years. The metal hatch groaned as I pried it open, the smell of dust and oil rising like a ghost. Inside a rusted ammo box were photographs, printed emails, and old cassette tapes labeled K. Blake Evidence. The photos made my blood freeze. Karen, the same immaculate woman who'd brought me cookies that morning, sneaking into Grandpa's yard at night, shining a flashlight into the workshop, peering through his windows. Another showed her rifling through his mailbox. The tapes were worse. I slid one into an old player and hit play. Grandpa's voice came through, hoarse but steady. "She's been harassing me about joining her HOA. Says it'll raise property values. When I refused, she started leaving violation notices. Said my barn color wasn't community approved. The sheriff called her warnings civil disputes. But she's not just a neighbor. She's building something, some kind of fake HOA network." I sat there in silence, the cold air of the shelter wrapping around me. Grandpa hadn't been paranoid. He'd been hunted. The next morning, Karen returned, this time without cookies. "Did you have a chance to review the documents?" she asked. Her tone was honey over glass. I nodded slowly. "Yeah, and I verified with the county. There's no Pine Valley HOA on record. For the first time, her eyes flickered. Then she smiled again. Oh, that's because we're in the process of re-registration. Bureaucracy moves slowly. In the meantime, I'll just keep you updated personally. She waved, turned, and walked away as if the conversation had gone exactly how she wanted. Over the next few days, envelopes started appearing in my mailbox, community violation warnings, with charges for things like unapproved driveway sealant and unauthorized structure modifications. Every notice came with a late fee. Every letter bore a signature Karen Blake, President, Pine Valley Estates, HOA. At first, I laughed. Then my mail piled up with invoices, inspection requests, and even threats of legal action. When my contractor's insurance provider called, they said they'd received a complaint about unsafe electrical work tied to my license number. Someone had submitted photos of exposed wiring photos clearly taken inside my own workshop. The walls were closing in, and I didn't even know how. One night, while reviewing Grandpa's notes, I noticed a list of names: the Daniels, the Petersons, the Walsh family. Next to each was a short phrase: sold under pressure, moved suddenly, foreclosure following HOA lien. These weren't just neighbors, they were victims. That realization hit me like a storm front. Karen had done this before, built false HOA paperwork, imposed fake fees, and forced people out through fabricated violations. Then she'd acquire the property through connected investors. I wasn't just inheriting Grandpa's land, I was inheriting his war. When I stepped outside that night, the air felt wrong too, still too expectant. Across the street, I saw the faint glow of a phone camera light behind Karen's curtains, pointed directly at my porch. She wanted me to know she was watching. I raised my coffee mug in a mock toast, forcing a smile I didn't feel. "All right, Karen," I whispered to the dark. "Let's see who blinks first." But deep down, I already knew she wasn't playing a neighborhood game. She was running a full-blown psychological operation. And I was the next target on her list. The storm shelter became my new command post. Every night after dark, I'd drag down an old camping lantern, open Grandpa's ammo box, and study the contents like a detective trying to decode a war plan. The deeper I dug, the more twisted the story became. Each folder was labeled by year and contained copies of letters, fake HOA violation notices, and handwritten summaries of conversations Grandpa had with community representatives. It was a paper trail of harassment stretching back 3 years. Roy Marshall wasn't some cranky old man ranting about his neighbors. He had documented every interaction with surgical precision. Each page showed how Karen Blake had built her empire of control, one fabricated rule at a time. She had started by convincing a handful of families that their neighborhood safety depended on joining her self-proclaimed association. She'd then issue compliance notices, collect fees, and threaten legal action for non-participation. No one questioned her because her documents looked professional, and she spoke with confidence that made even lawyers hesitate. What hit me hardest were the photographs. Grandpa had managed to capture her breaking into his barn, snapping photos of his workshop, and talking late at night with a local contractor, Mike Peterson. I recognized that name immediately. Peterson owned a construction business that handled code repairs and violations in nearby subdivisions. He'd been on the news once for price gouging homeowners after a flood. And now there he was, standing beside Karen's Lexus, shaking hands under the streetlight. I replayed the tape labeled May 17, Peterson call. Grandpa's voice crackled through the static. "Mike, I know you're working with her. Don't play dumb. She's trying to bleed folks dry. If you've got any decency left, you'll stop." A man's voice answered, low and nervous. "You don't understand, Roy. She's got files on everyone, me, the bank guys, even the sheriff's clerk. Nobody crosses her." I froze. Files on everyone, the implications twisted my stomach. Karen wasn't just a busybody, she was running a small-town blackmail ring dressed up as an HOA. The next morning, I drove into town to confirm Grandpa's suspicions. At the county courthouse, I requested property and corporation records for Pine Valley Estates HOA. The clerk scrolled through her database, frowned, then shook her head. "There's no such entity," she said. "Never has been." "You sure you've got the right name?" "I'm sure," I replied. "Check alternate filings, any DBA, nonprofit, or community trust." She humored me, searched again, then turned the screen around. Nothing. If someone's claiming HOA authority out there, it's a scam. That single sentence lit a fuse inside me. When I got home, I found a bright orange envelope taped to my gate, final notice. $2, 400 inches, outstanding community fees. It was signed again by President Karen Blake. I couldn't help but laugh, but it wasn't the kind of laugh that comes from humor. It was the kind that bubbles up from disbelief, the sound a man makes when he realizes someone is trying to gaslight him in broad daylight. That afternoon, I decided to confront her directly. She was watering her manicured rose bushes when I walked up to the edge of her driveway. "You've been trespassing on my land, forging documents, and harassing my family. It stops now," I said. Karen didn't even flinch. "Jake, sweetheart," she cooed. "This defensiveness isn't healthy. We're just trying to keep Pine Valley beautiful. Your property's condition affects everyone's resale value." I pointed toward my ranch. "That's private land. No shared roads, no association, no HOA jurisdiction. I already checked with the county. Her watering can tip, slightly spilling water onto the pavement. Then perhaps the county's records are outdated," she said with a tight smile. "You wouldn't believe how often bureaucrats misplace things. Anyway, I'd hate to see you fined further for noncompliance." "Fined for what?" "For defamation," she said smoothly, turning back to her roses. "You're spreading misinformation about community management." I realized then that logic wouldn't work on her. She thrived on intimidation and confusion, the same tactics that had broken my grandfather's patience. That night I returned to the storm shelter, determined to see how far the rabbit hole went. Inside one of Grandpa's folders, I found an old USB stick. When I opened it on my laptop, a hidden directory appeared labeled Surveillance Audio. There were over 40 recordings of phone calls and HOA meetings, many involving local officials and Peterson's construction company. One file caught my eye: Town Council, June.mp3. It was Karen's voice, smooth and deliberate. "If we formalize these violations, I can process compliance payments through my nonprofit account. The homeowners will think it's official, and the county will never notice. Just keep the paperwork off record." Then a man's voice replied, "And the sheriff, he's cooperative as long as he gets his campaign donation before November." I stopped the playback, pulse racing. This wasn't just neighborhood drama, this was corruption rooted deep enough to rot half the town. The next few days blurred together. I started documenting everything, every envelope, every phone call, every time I saw Karen's Lexus idle at the end of my driveway. But the more I tried to stay calm, the more her tactics escalated. Someone vandalized my mailbox, tearing out the bolts. Then a notice appeared on my windshield while I was parked downtown. "Community safety concern. Your behavior is under review." It was signed again by her. By week's end, 3 of my clients canceled contracts without explanation. One sent me a screenshot of an email they'd received from a concerned resident alleging I had a record of property damage and anger management issues. The email's writing style: flawless, polite, perfectly Karen. I was being erased, one reputation cut at a time. On Friday night, while sorting through Grandpa's recordings again, I heard something new, a voice I hadn't recognized before. A younger woman, nervous. "Roy, she made me sign something. Said if I didn't, she'd tell everyone about my husband's debt. Please don't get involved. She's dangerous." Then Grandpa's voice: "Everyone's dangerous when nobody stands up to them." The line hit like a thunderclap. He'd known what was coming and tried to protect this community long before anyone realized it needed saving. I stood up, staring through the storm shelter's narrow window. Outside, lightning crawled across the sky, briefly illuminating Karen's house across the street, her windows glowing a faint blue from whatever surveillance feed she was monitoring. That was the moment I made my decision. I wasn't going to run, hide, or wait for her to strike next. If she wanted a war, she'd get one. But I'd fight it the way my grandfather taught me, not with fists, but with evidence, patience, and the law. I picked up my phone and scrolled through contacts until I reached one I hadn't used in years. Special Agent Mark Reyes, Federal Property Crimes Division. "Reyes," his voice answered gruffly after 2 rings. "Hey, it's Jake Marshall. I think I've got a case for you. Fake HOA, forged liens, possible racketeering." There was silence for a moment. Then he asked, "You sure about this?" I looked again at the envelope on my desk, labeled Final Notice, and smiled coldly. "Positive," I said. "And I've got 3 years of evidence to prove it." When I hung up with Reyes, the first thing I felt wasn't relief, it was the weight of realization. Calling in a federal agent meant stepping into a war I couldn't walk away from. This wasn't about a few fake notices anymore. It was about exposing a criminal network buried beneath layers of community smiles and pastel paint. I didn't know if Reyes would believe me, but I knew one thing for sure: if I didn't move fast, Karen would destroy every trace of evidence before sunrise. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of gravel crunching under tires. Through the kitchen blinds, I saw Karen standing at my gate, her coral jacket gleaming in the morning light, clipboard in hand. Behind her was a man in a neon vest, a building inspector from the county. She was already escalating. I stepped out before they could enter. You're trespassing, I said sharply. Karen's voice was syrupy sweet. Jake, please, this is just a safety inspection. We received complaints about unlicensed electrical work on your property, from who I demanded. She tilted her head. Anonymous community reports. You understand public safety is everyone's concern. The inspector avoided my eyes. Sir, if you could just let me take a quick look at your workshop. Not without a warrant, I interrupted. You can tell whoever sent you that. Karen's smile flickered, then hardened. If you refuse inspection, I'll have to note that as a non-compliance event. It could affect your standing with the HOA and possibly the county zoning board. There is no HOA, I said, stepping closer. And you're not the law. Her eyes flashed the kind of cold calculation I'd only seen in predators. She turned to the inspector and said quietly, "Document the refusal." Then she walked away, her heels clicking on the gravel like a judge's gavel. That afternoon, my phone rang nonstop. Clients, vendors, even my bank. Somehow, Karen had sent an official alert claiming my business license was under investigation for safety violations. My contracts were frozen, payments suspended. Within hours, my financial lifeline was gone. That night, I sat in the workshop under a single bulb, staring at the bills piling up. I was boxed in, and she knew it. That's when I remembered Grandpa's phrase carved into the workbench: never surrender what you can't replace. I opened the drawer, pulled out his old Polaroid camera, and began taking pictures, every notice, every fake document, every sign of her harassment. Then I walked outside and installed 3 hidden trail cameras along the fence line angled toward Karen's property. If she wanted to play surveillance, I'd return the favor. 2 days later, Reyes called back. "Got your email," he said. "The photos you sent, they're convincing. But this looks local, not federal." "Not if you follow the money," I replied. "The contractor she's working with, Mike Peterson, he's connected to federal housing grants. She's filing false liens to seize properties funded by those grants." There was a long pause. Then his tone shifted. "All right, I'm listening. Can you get proof of the financial link?" "I can get more than that," I said, "but I'll need to play along." For the next week, I pretended to cooperate with Karen's HOA. I attended her community meeting at the town library, where she lectured about compliance initiatives to a room full of uneasy neighbors. Every word was rehearsed, a mix of guilt, fear, and civic pride. "Our goal," she said, smiling thinly, "is harmony through uniformity." It sounded less like neighborhood management and more like indoctrination. After the meeting, I approached her. "Maybe you're right," I said, forcing a polite tone. "I want to make things right with the community. Can we go over the paperwork again?" Her eyes sparkled with victory. "Of course. I'm glad you've come to your senses. Why don't you stop by tomorrow morning? I'll prepare the compliance package." "Perfect." The next day, I arrived at her house with a hidden recording device sewn into my jacket. Her living room was spotless, white leather furniture, gold picture frames, and rows of neatly labeled binders. Each binder was marked by street name: Oak Ridge, Meadowview, Pine Valley. "Record keeping," she said proudly, noticing my glance. "Transparency is important when managing a community." She slid a stack of papers toward me. "These are the outstanding violations for your property. Nothing personal, Jake, just protocol." I flipped through the forms. Every page was a masterpiece of forgery: legal seals, notarization, stamps, even signatures of county officials, all fake. But what caught my attention was the letterhead at the bottom: Pine Valley Management, LLC. "Never heard of this company," I said casually. "Oh, it's just our financial arm," she replied, sipping tea. "They handle property improvement funding." That was my link. Pine Valley Management wasn't an HOA, it was a shell corporation. "Mind if I take these home to review?" I asked. "Of course, darling. Just make sure to sign before Friday." I left her house smiling, but the second I reached my truck, I called Reyes. "We've got our thread," I said. "Pine Valley Management, LLC, run it through the federal contractor database." By evening, he called back. "You were right. It's registered in Austin, tied to Peterson Construction, and get this, receiving state housing restoration grants. That's federal money." That night, I printed every document and filed them alongside Grandpa's notes. I was close. But I still needed one undeniable piece of evidence, proof that Karen had been extorting families. My chance came sooner than expected. The next morning, Tom Walsh, the quiet neighbor across the street, knocked on my door. His eyes darted nervously as he spoke. "Jake, I need to tell you something. Karen's been making me watch your house. What she said, if I didn't help her monitor community stability, she'd tell my employer about my bankruptcy. She made me install a small camera in the oak tree by your driveway." My pulse spiked. "You still have it?" He nodded and handed me a small silver device. "I'm done being scared. Whatever you're planning, count me in." I shook his hand. You just helped me win this war. That night, I reviewed the footage from the hidden camera. What I saw confirmed everything. Karen wasn't working alone. The video showed Mike Peterson delivering envelopes to her porch marked assessment reports. Sometimes he arrived with county officials, sometimes with strangers in business suits. Each drop-off was methodical, always after dark, always secret. I compiled the footage, the forged paperwork, the Shell Corporation documents, and the audio recording of her admitting to financial operations. When I sent everything to Reyes, his response was short and direct. Sit tight. Don't engage. We're coming in. But Karen must have sensed something changing. The next day she appeared at my gate again, her perfect smile stretched too wide. Jake, she said, I've been hearing rumors. It'd be a shame if you made things harder for yourself. You're a smart man. You know how these stories can end. She leaned closer, voice dropping to a whisper. Walk away, and I'll forgive your violations. Keep pushing, and I'll bury you under them. I met her stare without flinching. You already dug your own grave, Karen. You just don't see it yet. Her smile froze. Then she turned and left, heels clacking like gunfire down the gravel road. That night, under the same Texas sky that had watched Grandpa fight his battles, I sat on the porch waiting. Somewhere in the distance, a car engine hummed, unmarked, low professional. Reyes had arrived, and the real fight was about to begin. Reyes and his partner showed up in an unmarked black Tahoe just after sunset. They parked at the end of my driveway, far enough to avoid Karen's cameras, but close enough for me to see the reflection of their dashboard lights. The night was humid, thick with the smell of pine and rain-soaked dirt. When Reyes stepped out, he looked exactly as I remembered from my contracting days. Dark suit, close-cropped hair, the posture of a man who didn't waste words. Marshall, he said, shaking my hand. You've been busy. I learned from the best, I replied, nodding toward the storm shelter. Everything's down there, paperwork, audio files, fake liens, even the Shell Company info. She's been running a racket for years. He followed me down into the shelter, his partner, a younger woman named Special Agent Hale, scanning the perimeter with a small infrared device. When Reyes saw the stacks of labeled folders and the wall of pinned photographs, he gave a low whistle. Looks like your granddad built a better case than most field offices do. He was thorough, I said quietly. He just didn't live long enough to finish it. Reyes crouched beside the evidence box. We can move on this, but we need timing. She's connected. If we arrest her too soon, half the files might disappear before we get warrants for her accounts. Hale glanced at her tablet. Her LLC's pulling transfers weekly. The next one's scheduled for Friday morning, $48,000 into a trust in Dallas. If we intercept it, we can tie federal fraud charges directly to her HOA operations. I nodded. You'll have your proof. But until then, she's still playing queen of the neighborhood. Reyes looked at me. You sure you can handle staying close to her without tipping her off? I've been doing it for weeks, I said. She thinks she's already won. He smirked. Good. Keep her thinking that. The next 2 days were hell. Karen doubled down on her psychological warfare, sending out mass emails to community members about my erratic behavior and potential threats. She even printed flyers, claiming I was under criminal investigation for fraudulent contracting. They showed up in mailboxes, pinned to community boards, even taped to the door of the diner where I used to eat lunch. But what scared me more was how easily people believed her. Neighbors who'd once waved at me now crossed the street when they saw my truck. I couldn't blame them. Karen's charm was her deadliest weapon. She didn't just manipulate, she rewrote reality. On Wednesday night, I found a new envelope wedged under my door. Inside was a single photo, me standing in my yard talking to Reyes. The note underneath said federal interference is a violation of HOA protocol. My blood went cold. She knew. I called Reyes immediately. She's onto us, I whispered. Someone's feeding her information. Stay calm, he said. We expected this. We're expediting the warrant. Just keep her occupied tomorrow. Make her believe you're still on the fence. So that's exactly what I did. Thursday morning, I showed up at Karen's house with a forced smile and a binder under my arm. I've reviewed the documents, I said, and maybe you're right. Maybe I've been too resistant. I just want to make things right. She blinked, surprised but pleased. That's wonderful, Jake. I knew you'd come around eventually. Inside her home was a shrine to control every cushion aligned, every photo frame symmetrical. On the wall hung a framed certificate that read Community Excellence Award, Pine Valley HOA. Fake, of course. She poured coffee while I pretended to glance through the compliance binder. You'll just need to sign here to confirm your participation, she said, sliding the final page across the table. I looked down. It wasn't a membership form. It was a property transfer agreement cleverly disguised under legal jargon. If I'd signed, I'd have effectively deeded my land to Pine Valley Management LLC. Seems thorough, I said slowly, hiding my disgust. Mind if I take a copy for my lawyer to review? Her smile faltered. There's really no need to involve outsiders. We handle things internally. Still, I said, folding the papers, I like to do things by the book. For the first time, I saw something flash behind her composure, panic, maybe even rage. Jake, she said softly, you have no idea what you're getting into. People like you always think they can beat the system, but the system always wins. Then it's a good thing I stopped playing by your rules, I replied. That night, the storm rolled in early. Thunder echoed across the valley as wind whipped through the trees. I sat on the porch watching the rain hammer Karen's pristine lawn, waiting for Reyes's call. It came at 10:42 p.m. Warrants secured, he said. We're moving at dawn. Keep your lights off tonight, she's unpredictable when cornered. But the knock came before sunrise. It wasn't Reyes. Through the peephole, I saw a silhouette, broad shoulders, baseball cap, holding a clipboard. A man's voice called out County Code Enforcement. We need to speak with you. I cracked the door an inch, and that's when I saw the glint of a gun barrel beneath his jacket. Instinct took over. I slammed the door and ducked low, just as the first shot shattered the window. Glass exploded across the floor. I crawled to the back hall, grabbed Grandpa's old revolver from the safe, and crouched behind the kitchen island. Two shadows moved across the porch, flashlights slicing through the dark. Then a voice unmistakably hers called out from outside, Jake, this is your last chance. Stop resisting community compliance, Karen. She had lost her mind. The next 5 minutes were chaos. Tires screeched, headlights cut through the rain, and suddenly red and blue strobes illuminated the driveway. Reyes's Tahoe slid to a stop, agents pouring out, weapons drawn. Federal agents, Hale shouted. Drop your weapon. The imposter hesitated, then bolted toward Karen's car. She backed away, screaming as agents swarmed. Within seconds, they had him pinned to the ground. Hale cuffed Karen herself, her perfect hair plastered to her face by the storm. I stepped outside, soaked heart pounding as Reyes approached. You okay? Ask me when I stop shaking, I said. He nodded toward Karen. We got her servers, her financials, everything. The LLC transfers were fake invoices for federal disaster funds. We've got mail fraud, wire fraud, identity theft, the works. Karen looked at me through the rain, her eyes wide but eerily calm. You think you've won, she hissed. You have no idea how deep this goes. Reyes ignored her, reading her rights, as she screamed about property order and community perfection. When the agents finally loaded her into the SUV, she locked eyes with me one last time. This isn't over, she whispered through the glass. You'll see what happens when the real owners come. The door slammed shut, cutting her voice off like the end of a bad dream. The rain slowed to a drizzle. The flashing lights reflected off puddles in the driveway, red and blue, rippling across the soaked gravel. I looked toward the workshop, where Grandpa's words were still carved into the bench. Never surrender what you can't replace. For the first time in months, I felt like maybe he could finally rest. But I also knew Karen was right about one thing. This wasn't over. The morning after Karen's arrest felt eerily quiet, as if the neighborhood itself was holding its breath. The flashing lights were gone, the mud had dried into cracked scars along the gravel driveway, and the only sign of the chaos from the night before was a single bullet hole in my front window, a permanent reminder that some wars come, disguised as community disputes. I brewed coffee and stepped out onto the porch. Across the street, Karen's mansion sat dark, the blinds drawn. Her Lexus had been impounded, and yellow tape stretched across the front gate. For a moment, I allowed myself to think it was over. Then my phone buzzed. It was Reyes. Morning, Jake, he said, his voice low. You might want to sit down. That's never a good way to start a call. We ran through Karen's financials overnight. You were right, the HOA was just the surface. She'd set up 6 shell corporations tied to contractors across 3 counties. Every one of them pulled money from federal relief grants under the table. I frowned. She was laundering disaster funds. Exactly. And get this, her LLC's last transfer wasn't to Peterson Construction like we thought. It went to a holding company registered under the name Aurelia Development Group. We traced it to a man named Thomas Greer. That name made me pause. Wait. The county zoning commissioner, Reyes, exhaled slowly. Bingo. She wasn't working alone, Jake. Greer's been signing off on fake building permits and funneling kickbacks through her HOA operations. You didn't just catch a manipulative neighbor, you tripped over a state-level racketeering case. My stomach tightened. So what happens now? We've already forwarded everything to the Texas Attorney General's office, he said. But you need to stay alert. People like Greer don't like loose ends, and you just blew up his front operation. After the call, I sat on the porch steps for a long while staring at the wet grass. For the first time, the fear wasn't about Karen anymore. It was about what she'd hinted at before being taken away. You'll see what happens when the real owners come. That afternoon, Sarah came home from her shift at the hospital. For weeks, our conversations had been cold and mechanical, poisoned by Karen's manipulation. But now, as she dropped her bag by the door, there was something new in her eyes, remorse. "Jake," she said softly, "I saw the news. They showed Karen being arrested on live TV. I'm so sorry I didn't believe you." I poured her a cup of coffee and handed it over. "She fooled everyone. You weren't the only one." Sarah sat beside me on the porch, swing the same place we'd had our worst argument 3 weeks earlier. When she came to see me at work, she sounded so reasonable, she said. She talked about safety, community, unity. She even said you were starting to show aggressive paranoia. I thought she cared. "She studied people," I said quietly. "She learned their weak spots, made herself indispensable, and then used them. She built her power by making everyone doubt themselves." Sarah took my hand. "I want to fix this. Whatever's left of us, I want to rebuild it." I didn't answer right away. The wind rustled through the oak trees, scattering drops of rain off the leaves. Finally, I nodded. "Then we start by finishing what Grandpa began. If Karen was working with county officials, there are more victims out there. People who don't even know they've been conned." That night, I went through the last of Grandpa's tapes, labeling everything for Reyes's office. The final recording wasn't a phone call or surveillance clip, it was a message. Grandpa's voice came through, faint but clear. "If she ever goes down, others will follow. The powerful protect their own. But remember, Jake, the law isn't just for the rich. It's for anyone stubborn enough to use it right." He coughed, then added, "And if you ever doubt yourself, look at this land. It's still here because I refuse to sell my dignity for convenience." I sat in silence, feeling the weight of his words. By Friday, the media had descended on Pine Valley. News vans lined the road, reporters shouting into cameras about the suburban HOA fraud that shocked Texas. Neighbors peeked from their curtains, torn between fascination and embarrassment. Then came the real twist. Late that afternoon, a black SUV pulled up to Karen's property. 2 men in suits stepped out, one carrying a briefcase, the other holding a document envelope. They ignored the yellow tape and walked straight to the front door, where county deputies were still cataloging evidence. I recognized one of them immediately, Commissioner Thomas Greer. Reyes's warnings echoed in my head. I grabbed my camera and started recording from behind my fence. Greer and his associates spoke briefly with the deputies, flashed some kind of authorization, and within minutes they were inside Karen's house. By the time Reyes arrived 20 minutes later, they were gone, along with 2 file boxes of evidence. "Damn it," Reyes muttered, pacing. "They pulled jurisdiction strings before the warrant chain updated. Anything they took is officially county property now, so they're covering tracks," I said. "Exactly. And they're sloppy about it, which means they're nervous." He turned to me. "We're not done yet. You willing to testify if this goes federal?" I nodded without hesitation. "If it means exposing every last one of them, absolutely." That weekend, Reyes and Hale relocated me and Sarah to a safe motel near Austin. While the investigation expanded, I kept working remotely, reviewing documents, helping the agents connect Karen's compliance files to county-level land grabs. Each new revelation made my skin crawl. Families had lost homes across 3 towns under the same pretense, unpaid HOA dues that never legally existed. Sunday morning, Reyes called again. "We've got indictments pending." "But Jake, brace yourself. Someone leaked your name to the press." The story broke that evening. Whistleblower contractor exposes massive Texas HOA fraud scheme. My phone exploded with calls, reporters, old clients, strangers, thanking me for standing up. Sarah looked at me as I shut the phone off. "You're a hero now," she said. I shook my head. "Heroes don't feel this tired." That night, as we lay in the motel bed, listening to traffic outside, Sarah whispered, "You know what scares me most, what she's in custody, but I keep dreaming she's still watching." I stared at the ceiling, the hum of the air conditioner filling the silence. That's because she built her power out of fear. Even when she's gone, it lingers. But it'll fade. The truth always outlasts fear. At dawn, we drove back to Pine Valley under federal escort so I could retrieve the last of Grandpa's things. As I stood in front of the workshop, one final time, sunlight broke through the clouds, washing over the property. The land looked alive again, not perfect, not manicured, but free. I touched the workbench, tracing my fingers over Grandpa's carved words. "Never surrender what you can't replace." This time I understood them fully. Karen had stolen Peace Money Trust, but she couldn't take legacy. And as I locked the door behind me, I made a silent promise. Her perfect community was gone forever, but what would rise from its ashes would be something she could never understand, a real one. For a few weeks, I almost believed things were normal again. The sun came back, the news crews left, and the neighbors who once avoided me now waved with quiet shame. Without Karen's surveillance network, Pine Valley felt like a ghost town learning how to breathe again. Lawns grew uneven, fences went unrepaired, and somehow that imperfection made everything more human. But peace never lasts long when corruption still has roots. One humid Thursday morning, I got a call from Reyes. His voice carried that calm edge that only bad news wears. "Jake, we've got a problem." Karen's attorney filed an appeal for conditional release, pending psychiatric evaluation. "The court's reviewing it next week." I froze. "You mean she could walk free? For now, she's in custody." But her defense is arguing temporary insanity, claiming she had a stress-induced dissociative episode caused by years of community leadership trauma. I let out a sharp laugh. "She didn't have trauma. She caused it." "Yeah," Reyes said, "but the system loves a redemption narrative. If they buy her angle, she might get house confinement until trial." Where I asked already knowing I wouldn't like the answer. Pine Valley. Her property's technically under federal freeze, but it's still her legal residence. For a moment I couldn't speak. The thought of her stepping back onto that street into the same house across from mine made my chest tighten. Reyes must have heard the silence. "Jake, I know what you're thinking. Don't do anything stupid. The feds are watching her communications 24/7. "I'm not planning anything," I lied. That night I sat alone in the workshop, staring at the bullet hole in the window and the faint outline of my reflection. I thought about everything Karen had done, the lies, the manipulation, the families she broke. If she came back, this neighborhood would never heal. 2 days later, the news confirmed it. The court granted Karen temporary release under psychiatric monitoring. When she returned, she didn't look like the same woman. Her hair was darker, her once flawless posture slightly bent. She wore a gray cardigan instead of her trademark coral blazers. But the eyes were the same calculating, observant, watching. Always watching. Sarah noticed first. "She's playing a part," she whispered as we peeked through the curtains. "Look at her pretending to be fragile. She's testing the neighborhood's sympathy." I nodded. "And when she figures out who's still scared, she'll start rebuilding." We didn't have to wait long. Within a week, anonymous flyers appeared on community mailboxes again. "Let's restore order to Pine Valley together." No signature, but the font was identical to her old HOA notices. I found one taped to my front gate, weighed down by a small stone, an old tactic she used when she wanted to send a personal message. I took it inside, photographed it, and sent it to Reyes. He called back within the hour. "Got it. We'll add it to the surveillance record." "She's not supposed to contact anyone." "Reyes," I said, lowering my voice. "What if she's not doing this alone anymore? What if Greer's people are helping her rebuild under a different name?" He paused. "That's exactly what we're afraid of." The next morning I noticed a white sedan parked across the street. The same car sat there every day, engine off, windows tinted. When I approached it, drove away, slow, deliberate, mocking. Sarah started getting anonymous texts. "You can't hide from the truth forever." It was clear Karen might have lost her freedom, but she hadn't lost her reach. I called a meeting at my house with the few neighbors who'd stood up to her before Tom Walsh, the Smiths, and a retired teacher named Carol Jensen. We gathered in the workshop, surrounded by the evidence that had brought Karen down the first time. Tom looked uneasy. "Jake, are you sure this is smart? She's dangerous." "Last time I almost lost my job." "She's counting on that fear," I said. "But she can't control us unless we stay divided. We expose whatever she's doing now, we end it for good." Carol nodded. "Then we start watching her the same way she watched us." Over the next week, we took shifts keeping an eye on Karen's property. She rarely went outside, but lights flickered in her basement at odd hours. One night I used my drone, the same model I'd bought for electrical inspections, to capture footage through her side window. What I saw made my blood run cold. Karen wasn't alone. 2 men in suits sat at her dining table, flipping through binders labeled Pine Valley Restoration Project. On the wall behind them hung a new banner, the Pine Valley Trust, Rebuilding Communities with Integrity. It was her HOA reborn under a new name. I sent the footage to Reyes immediately. He replied 10 minutes later, "Good catch. One of those men is confirmed Greer's aide. We're securing a new warrant." But Karen must have known she was being watched. The next morning, all her blinds were shut, and by noon her car was gone. Reyes called again that evening, tension sharp in his tone. "We lost visual. She's off-grid. Phones turned off. GPS removed. We think she's heading for Dallas." "Dallas," I said. "That's where her shell company's trust account is based." "Exactly," Reyes said. "If she gets there first, she can pull the last of her money before the freeze hits." I can get there faster, I said without thinking. Jake, no, he snapped. This is federal jurisdiction now. But I'd already grabbed my keys. 3 hours later, I was driving down I-35 under a blood-orange sunset, Sarah on speakerphone begging me to turn back. I told her what I told Reyes. This isn't about revenge. It's about stopping her before she burns someone else's life down. When I reached Dallas, the storm clouds were rolling in again, heavy and gray. I parked outside the Aurelia Development office, an empty storefront with blacked-out windows. Through the glass, I could see movement, Karen standing at the counter talking to a clerk who looked nervous enough to faint. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. She turned, startled. For a split second, I saw something flicker in her expression, fear, then contempt. Jake, she said softly, still playing the hero, still pretending to be sane. I shot back. She smiled, that same old weapon. You don't understand. I built something beautiful. You destroyed it. Do you think people really want freedom? They want control. They crave it. I just gave them what they wanted. By stealing their homes, by saving them from chaos, she hissed. The clerk slipped away toward the back exit, leaving just the two of us. Outside, thunder cracked like gunfire. You can't win this time, I said. The feds are already here. Her expression softened into something chillingly serene. Maybe. But you'll never kill the idea. There's always another Karen waiting in another neighborhood holding another clipboard. She stepped closer, voice lowering. You didn't beat me, Jake. You just delayed me. Before I could respond, headlights flooded the room. Reyes and 2 agents burst through the door, weapons raised. Federal agents, step away from him. Karen raised her hand, smiling. You're late, Agent Reyes. When they cuffed her, she didn't resist. She just kept looking at me with that same eerie calm, whispering one last line as they led her out into the storm. This isn't over. Perfection always finds a way back. The thunder swallowed her voice, and when the SUV doors closed behind her, I finally exhaled. I thought it was the end. But deep down, I knew monsters like Karen don't die. They just move to the next neighborhood, change their name, and start again. And this time I'd be ready. 2 months later, Pine Valley no longer felt like the same place. The street that once glowed under HOA-approved lampposts was now patchy with uneven bulbs, cracked sidewalks, and laughter that sounded unpracticed but real. Kids rode bikes across lawns that had once been measured for aesthetic consistency. People barbecued without fear of a noise citation. Freedom had texture again, messy, loud, beautiful. But beneath the relief, an undercurrent of unease still ran through us. We all knew the headlines: Karen Blake sentenced to 14 years for fraud and conspiracy. It should have been closure. Yet something about the case felt unfinished, as if one shadow still lingered behind every bright morning. That feeling only deepened when Reyes showed up unannounced one Friday evening. His Tahoe pulled into my driveway just as Sarah and I were sitting down for dinner. He looked exhausted, his usual confidence replaced by quiet frustration. Tell me you're here for steak, I said, trying to lighten the mood. He managed a tired smile. I wish, but I'm here on business. Sarah frowned. It's Karen again, isn't it? Reyes nodded. Her appeal didn't hold, but something strange happened during processing. The Bureau found a second set of files in her possession, encrypted flash drives labeled Community Expansion Plan. We cracked one this week. He set a folder on my table and opened it. Inside were digital printouts, maps of suburban developments across 5 states: Arizona, Florida, Colorado, Texas, and Georgia. Each location was marked with identical red circles labeled HOA integration zones. What the hell am I looking at? I asked. Reyes leaned back. A blueprint. Karen wasn't just running her own scam, she was franchising it. She sold her fake HOA model to other operators through her LLC, all under the pretense of consulting services. We've already found 3 active offshoots using her paperwork templates. Sarah covered her mouth. You mean there are more like her? Maybe not as charismatic, Reyes said, but just as dangerous. Her network's still alive, and we think one of her partners is trying to resurrect the operation under a new name, the Harmony Initiative. The name hit me like a cold wind. Harmony. It was exactly the word Karen had always used when she justified control. Why tell me this? I asked. Because you know her tactics better than anyone, Reyes said. We're forming a task group to investigate HOA-based fraud networks. I want you consulting for us unofficially. Sarah shook her head. He's done enough, Agent Reyes. He almost got killed for this. I looked at her, then at Reyes. When do we start? The following week, I found myself in Austin, sitting in a sterile conference room at the Federal Property Crimes Division headquarters. Across from me was a small team, 2 analysts, a cyber investigator, and Reyes. They projected a PowerPoint on the wall, titled Case Expansion Operation False Authority. The first slide showed a suburban development outside Phoenix, Harmony Initiative Desert Bloom Community, the analyst explained. Residents report identical tactics, fake violations, psychological manipulation, and lien threats from a self-appointed compliance board. The leader, a woman named Melissa Crane, former paralegal. No official HOA registration. I leaned forward. What's the connection to Karen Reyes? Click to the next slide. It showed an email chain between K. Blake and M. Crane with the subject line, Template for Integration Protocol. She trained her, I muttered. Reyes nodded. And that's just one. There's a retired cop in Florida doing the same thing under Community Renewal Group and a church deacon in Colorado who's been using HOA bylaws to seize foreclosed properties. A part of me wanted to walk away right then. I'd already seen what this kind of madness did to families, to my own marriage, to Grandpa, to an entire neighborhood that lost years of peace. But another part of me, the part that had lived through the worst of it, couldn't ignore what I was seeing. I spent the next month working with Reyes' task force, dissecting Karen's methods piece by piece. Her fraud wasn't just legal trickery, it was psychological architecture. She'd built systems that mimicked real bureaucracy so convincingly that victims complied out of conditioned obedience. We tracked digital payments, shell company filings, and even training manuals she'd written under pseudonyms like Civic Leader's Toolkit. Every document echoed her voice. Order creates peace. Structure breeds trust. Fear maintains compliance. The deeper we went, the more it felt like unraveling a cult disguised as community management. Then one night, while combing through her archived emails, I found something that made my skin crawl. A message dated 2 months before her arrest, sent from an encrypted account to kblake@pvalleymanagement.com. Subject: Integration complete. Texas was only the beginning. Phase 2 launches in August. Funding secured. The others are ready. No signature, but the domain traced back to aureliadevelopment.org, that same shell company. I printed it and stormed into Reyes' office. You told me Aurelia was dissolved. He looked up, eyes narrowing. It was. Or at least that's what the paperwork said. Who the hell sent this? Whoever's still running her playbook, I said. You think Karen was the head of the snake. She was just the mouth. Reyes sighed. We'll trace it. But Jake, I need you to understand, if Aurelia's still operational, they're going to come after anyone who threatens exposure. That includes you. I gave a grim smile. They already tried once. A week later, Sarah and I returned home. Pine Valley looked almost peaceful again, kids playing soccer in the cul-de-sac, the Smiths repainting their fence. But on the windshield of my truck, a new envelope waited. No postage, no signature, just one line typed on plain paper. Perfection never dies. Sarah read it over my shoulder, her voice barely a whisper. Jake, maybe it's time to leave. But I couldn't. This wasn't just my home anymore. It was Grandpa's legacy, the proof that truth could outlast corruption if someone was stubborn enough to defend it. That night I called Reyes. You were right, I said. She's gone, but her ghost's still here. He sighed. Then we keep digging. Because as long as people like her exist, there's work to do. Outside, the Texas sky burned orange with the last light of dusk. I looked at the land, scarred, imperfect, and finally honest, and thought of Grandpa's words again. Never surrender what you can't replace. Maybe that's what this whole fight had been about, not just keeping property, but protecting the one thing people like Karen never understood: freedom. The day the verdict came down, the sun burned mercilessly over Austin. The courthouse steps shimmered with heat, and the air hummed with the restless murmur of reporters. I stood beside Reyes, watching as the U.S. Marshals escorted Karen Blake, now dressed in a beige prison jumpsuit, wrists, chained expression unreadable, toward the waiting van. It should have felt like victory. 14 years in federal prison restitution, orders property seizures across multiple states. The whole empire she built reduced to a footnote in a fraud case. But watching her disappear behind that armored door, I didn't feel triumph. I felt exhaustion. Hell of a ride, Reyes said quietly. Feels like she's still running the show somehow, I muttered. Every time she opens her mouth, people still listen. Reyes nodded. She's charismatic. Even some jurors said they pitied her. But don't underestimate what this trial did. You helped expose a network that reached farther than any of us imagined. As the van pulled away, I caught one last glimpse of Karen's face through the tinted window. She wasn't screaming this time. She was smiling faintly, knowingly. The kind of smile that says, I've already planned the sequel. When I returned to Pine Valley that evening, the neighborhood looked softer under the golden light. Someone had hung American flags along the cul-de-sac. Kids ran through sprinklers, shouting with the kind of carefree noise the HOA had once banned. For the first time in years, the place felt alive. Sarah was waiting for me on the porch, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. "You did it," she said. "We did it," I corrected her. "You believed me when it mattered." She smiled. "So what now? You going back to contracting?" "Maybe part-time," I said, glancing toward the horizon. But I think Grandpa had bigger plans for this land. He always said it wasn't just property, it was proof that a man could still own his peace in a world built to take it. We sat in silence for a moment, listening to cicadas in the trees. Then Sarah said something that caught me off guard. "You should tell the story." I raised an eyebrow. "What, like write a book or something?" she said. "People need to know this isn't just one crazy neighbor story. It's a pattern and it's happening everywhere." I thought about it that night as I walked the perimeter of the ranch. The bullet hole in the window had been patched, the gate repainted, but scars still lingered, not just on the land, but on me. When I reached the workshop, I unlocked the door and flicked on the light. The walls were still lined with Grandpa's tools, his handwriting still carved into the bench. "Never surrender what you can't replace." Underneath it, I'd taped a copy of the federal case summary, United States v. Blake, Greer, and Peterson. It wasn't vengeance, it was closure. I sat down and began typing on my old laptop. Not a statement for the press, not a legal report, just a story. My story. How it began with a welcome packet and ended with FBI raids, courtrooms, and the unraveling of a suburban empire built on fear. I didn't write it for fame or money. I wrote it for the people who'd been made to feel powerless. 2 weeks later, I posted it online under the title "The HOA That Tried to Steal My Life." I expected maybe a handful of readers. Instead, it exploded. Thousands of comments poured in, homeowners from Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, all telling their own horror stories about overreaching HOAs, neighborhood dictators, and community presidents who thought they were above the law. One comment stood out. "My mom lost her home to a fake HOA in Florida last year." Reading this made me realize she wasn't crazy. Thank you, Jake. That's when I realized Sarah was right. This wasn't the end. It was the start of something larger. By fall, I was working with Reyes's task force full-time. We traveled to small towns, meeting residents who'd been bullied, fined, or evicted under fraudulent community management. We showed them how to verify public filings, how to spot fake legal documents, how to push back with real law instead of fear. Some nights after long briefings, Reyes and I would sit in motel parking lots drinking burnt coffee out of paper cups. "You ever think she planned this far ahead?" I asked once. Reyes chuckled. "You mean the network?" "Yeah," I said. "She built a system that feeds on people's obedience. Take one down, another pops up. Like mold." He shrugged. "Then we keep scrubbing." That line stuck with me. Because it wasn't just about HOAs. It was about every system built to make ordinary people doubt their own rights. Winter came early that year. Pine Valley turned quiet again, but in a different way, peaceful, not fearful. One morning, Tom Walsh dropped by with a thermos of coffee and a grin. "You hear the news," he said. "They're dissolving all of Karen's LLCs. The county's reclaiming her property for community use." I smiled. "About time something good came out of that house." "What are you going to do with your land now?" he asked. "Thinking of turning part of it into a community garden," I said. "Something real, not another illusion of order." He laughed. "Your granddad would have liked that." "Yeah," I said softly. "He would have." As he left, I stood by the gate watching the sunrise paint the sky gold and crimson. The air felt cleaner, lighter. For the first time since this all began, I wasn't waiting for the next fight. Months later, I received a letter with no return address. Inside was a single page, typed neatly in black ink. "You can't destroy perfection, you can only delay it. H." No signature, but the initial told me enough. Hale traced it back to a prison mail service in Colorado, but the sender's identity couldn't be confirmed. Karen might have been behind bars, but her ideology, her obsession with control, had already taken root in others. I folded the letter, placed it in the workshop drawer, and locked it. Not out of fear, out of respect for the reminder that some evils don't die easily. Then I went outside, dug my hands into the soil, and planted the first row of tomatoes for the community garden. Kids from down the road came to help. Sarah brought lemonade. The laughter that filled the air wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that was enough. As the sun set, I looked across the field one last time, thinking about Grandpa Reyes, Sarah, and everyone who refused to bow to fear. "Never surrender what you can't replace," I whispered. Because in the end, that's what this entire battle had been about. Not land, not revenge, not pride. It was about freedom. And for the first time, it finally felt earned. Sometimes evil doesn't wear a mask, it wears a smile, a clipboard, and the promise of community. Karen Blake wasn't just one woman. She was a reflection of every system that hides control behind civility. Her HOA wasn't about property values, it was about power, obedience, and fear disguised as order. But power like that only survives when people stay silent. The moment someone says no more, the illusion cracks. Jake's story reminds us that standing up for your rights isn't about defiance, it's about preserving what truly matters: dignity, truth, and peace of mind. Whether it's an overreaching HOA, a corrupt official, or anyone trying to dictate how you live, never forget that ownership isn't just about property. It's about self-respect. So if you ever find yourself staring down a Karen in a pastel blazer demanding control, remember, perfection can be faked, but freedom can't. Watch until the end to see the twist, and don't forget to drop your city and time in the comments below.